So the nature of God and human nature, I know I'm already on a shaky foundation with some of you. But I want to share a little about what I believe. And I want to start a conversation that I imagine many of us will be having for years to come. And I'll begin by telling a couple stories about the midwives who helped my son Henry be born, and partly because it was a moment of glimpsing the holy, that moment of his elongated purple head popping out into this world. But also because I think God was happening all along, not just in that moment. The midwives, they were lovely. I'm going to tell a couple of kind of, not flattering stories about them, but they really were wonderful. But one of them, when she found out that my ex-wife and I were Unitarian Universalist ministers, she said, "Oh, Unitarians, I used to be a Unitarian. I went to a Unitarian fellowship. We were out in upstate New York." And she said, "You know what we came to realize, Unitarians, they won't tell you what to believe, and they won't be there for you when you need them." And it wasn't my experience, hasn't been my experience, but I know what she's talking about. It's something about this question of what can we rely on, what can we be dependent on when we don't center a common doctrine. We don't have a common foundation about our beliefs about God and humanity. For decades, our movement, our denomination has struggled with this question of what is our theological center? So a few of my beliefs and then some of our tradition's resources. God, for me, is a verb. I believe that God begins in the underlying processes of the universe, the same processes that eventually result in stardust forming the Milky Way, our solar system, our Earth, that eventually result in life and life evolving into myriad possibilities, including us, this. God in us, happening through us, through all of it. Which means that, yes, God in those moments of amazement, of a child being born, of a friend holding your hand, of listening to one another over tea, but also God happening in our very worst, present through the most violent and destructive ways we can be. In this way, God is change, as Octavia Butler would put it, one of my favorite books. Many of you, I'm sure, have read it, Parable of the Sower. She describes this young woman struggling to survive and foster community in a post-apocalyptic California as migrants march up abandoned highways towards the north, as violence destroys lives left and right. This daughter of a Christian preacher tries to start a new religion. Earth seed, she calls it, and the core of her faith is simply, God is change, shape God. Scattered through the book are fragments of the imagined sacred text of this new religion. God is power, she writes, infinite, irresistible, inexorable, indifferent. And yet God is pliable, trickster, teacher, chaos, clay. God exists to be shaped. God is change. Or in another, any change may bear seeds of benefit, seek them out. Any change may bear seeds of harm, beware. God is infinitely malleable. God is change. And so all this really resonates for me, and it goes along with this arc of thinking that has been named process theology in our theological past, the thinking that God is a verb, that it's this unfolding, undergoing process. And yet, I also believe something that doesn't quite fit with that indifferent God. I believe, as our Universalist ancestors believed, that God is love. This was our Universalist heresy, that God would not damn anyone to hell. That early Universalist preacher John Murray would go around talking about how if we as human parents can forgive our children, certainly a divine parent could forgive even our worst trespasses. Or Hosea Ballou, who was one of those early circuit riders in what we now call New England, the most influential of those circuit riders. He would be found wandering around the New Hampshire hills with a Baptist preacher. And the story goes that one afternoon they argued theology as they traveled. You might imagine the two of them on horseback having a conversation about the Bible. And at one point, the Baptist looks over and says, "Brother Ballou, if I were a Universalist and feared not the fires of hell, I could hit you over the head and steal your horse and saddle and ride away, and I'd still go to heaven." And Hosea Ballou purportedly looked over at him and said, "If you were a Universalist, the idea would never occur to you." I think being a Universalist is about aligning ourselves, our lives, with this mysterious force of love, to make patterns of love visible in the world. And this love, it's really too small a word, but this love, it's the quality of life I most long to embody for myself, the love of self, for others, and for the world. This love, it is what we're coming to name as the center of our theology. And we'll have lots of conversation to come, I'm sure, about that Article 2 revision that some of you have had some conversation about already, the principles and purposes that have existed since, in the current form, since the 80s, a current effort to see if there's new language to try and name our core values. And in that effort, the central value is love. And the only trouble is, I don't know what love is. I'm pretty sure it's not what makes a Subaru a Subaru. I don't know what love is, but I know that it's saved my life over and over. It's caught me when I've fallen. It's helped me to make sense of my suffering. I don't know what it is, but I believe that whatever it is, whatever complex network of feelings and experiences and ideas I'm trying to convey, to sum up when I use that word, that it must be rooted in something deeper, something more fundamental than human experience. We know we see love in other animals and in mammals, it's obvious. But I think it must be deeper even than that, something primordial. And when I start talking about love and God in this way, it starts feeling flimsy to me, because I know our culture has squished that word down to try, hallmarkized that word, to make it something that is about feeling loving, about sweetness and romance and maybe friendship and family and pets, but understood primarily as a feeling one has towards another. And yes, love does involve feelings, but As anyone who's ever been loved or loved anyone knows, those feelings are not all sweet, warm, and fluttery. Love does bring us happiness and comfort and pleasure. It can bring us safety and contentment, and it brings us worry and fear, stress and anxiety. Love summons longing and ache, pain and despair and sorrow. Love brings us grief. We can fester over love in bitterness and resentment. Love inspires passion, determination, anger, devotion. So love, I don't think it's a feeling, it's a force, a quality of life that tugs on our hearts, our guts, our spirit, around which we shape our lives. I was thinking about this one day walking out on our beautiful Northern California coastline. You know those places where you can just see all the way out into the horizon, the cliffs overhanging the ocean. I don't think it stretches the imagination too much to say that the ocean so loves the land that it's always yearning to pull it closer, waves crashing with love again and again against the rocks, and rocks whose love also leaves them attached to the formations that they have made over centuries, holding their shape. The fundamental forces of the universe, forces like gravity and those, physicists talk about the strong and weak nuclear poles and so on. These forces, they are descriptions of how things are bound together, of how matter pulls on matter, of how everything is in relationship to everything else. And this love does have that togetherness quality, that pulling together, but it also has a force of individuation, of becoming more unique and complex expressions, so that no star is like any other, no one's inner landscape merged with another's. And just as it's, I think, the nature of the ocean to show its love in crashing waves, and the nature of the rock to show its love in holding shape, we too have been shaped in such a way. Do you have such a nature? One of my favorite books about parenting that I've read is called The Blessing of a Skinned Knee. And it's a reflection on Jewish parenting. And she talks at one point about these two inherent natures that we each have in the Jewish understanding, these two natures of good and evil in a simplistic sense. But she talks about the one that's our nature for evil is the Yetzer Hara. And the Yetzer Hara says that, yes, this is your force that makes you capable of destruction and hurt, but it's also the capacity for passion and creativity. It's the same place inside. And that as a parent or anyone caring for a young person developing their nature in relation to this Yetzer Hara inside, that seeing how their particular unique form of destructive, creative, passionate energy, helping them to shape it so that they can use it for a life-enhancing good is the role of the caregiver. And sadly, I think some of us, maybe all of us to one degree or another, we learn instead of harnessing and riding that aliveness to numb it out because of its potential for evil, to dampen down this holy life force. The neuropsychologists Lawrence Heller and Aline Lapierre name this life force healthy aggression. love expressed through us in the fierce desire for aliveness. And in my experience, that following that path, that aliveness, has been the most important teacher in what it means to have a self. And this self, I think this is maybe common ground for us. Whether you talk about God or not, whether you understand there to be a metaphysical reality interfacing with that self, whether you use humanist language that is purely psychological, all of us have a core, inviolable self. It's what we mean when we say the inherent worth and dignity of every person. It's this self that is what we talk about in Buddha nature, what some refer to as the soul, what William Ellery Channing, who was that first preacher of Unitarianism here on this land, called the powers of the soul. He talked about reason and creativity, about imagination, about the heart and the intellect, about compassion and kindness, all of these as powers of the soul. And that while Jesus may have been an important example of someone who had cultivated them in big ways, rather than diminish the divinity of Jesus, Channing lifted us all up to say we are all like that. We all have these divine capacities, these powers of the soul. That I would say is the same as what we might call a self, a core self, a true self. And we'll talk about that a lot more to come. But we can define this in many ways, but not any way. We do have boundaries about how we talk about God and self. We have boundaries because there are ideas that do harm. I mentioned a couple weeks ago the exhibit at Hinda Wiley's exhibit at the Young. These young black bodies prone, draped on the ground in ways that immediately bring a whole slew of images of the vulnerability of black bodies in our racist society. And yet, at the same time, are lifted up, illuminated in a transcendent way to emphasize their exquisite humanity, even divinity. Bright colors, closed eyes, and just on the edge of beatific and hurting. In part of the artist's statement, they said, in Western painting, God is represented as light, bathing his figures in a piercing brightness. Instead, Gahinda cites and subverts this centuries-old practice, projecting his figures into a space of reverence historically reserved for Christ, his followers, and by extension, whiteness. And so he exposes how equating light with divinity attributes moral value to color and reveals a key mechanism through which the concept of naturalized whiteness emerges, a means to assert the sanctity of life. Wiley's light infuses his figures with a sense of otherworldly ecstasy that allows them to transcend their precarious conditions and highlights their beauty, dignity, and humanity. What we believe about God and human nature matters. And this life force, this Yetzer Hara, this self that is the foundation of artistry that cries out, no, the light of God is not only for the light-skinned, that declares with the moral agency of love these prone black bodies, these vulnerable young ones in their hoodies and ripped jeans are every bit as divine as European kings and queens, every bit as divine as Christ. So we don't need to agree on whether God is or what God is, but we do need to agree that however we talk about the ground of being, it's the same ground underneath us all. When the midwives, another one of them, heard that we were Unitarian Universalists, she wanted to know more. And Henry's mom explained, she said, well, Unitarian, one source, we're all connected, and Universalists, that I believe in a loving God who wouldn't send anyone to hell. And the midwife took a deep breath. And she said, well, I'm a Christian, which means I believe in a loving God too, but he has standards. You can imagine, she was agape, Emily. And later, after some reflection, after we crowdsourced a response from Facebook friends, many of whom are Unitarian ministers, we had the response, when you're looking for that line, that comeback right in the moment. It hadn't come, but we had it later, that line you wish you could just go back in time and say, well, she would have said, in our tradition, we have standards for God. We do. We have standards for a God or for any ultimate truth. These standards, they're the foundation that holds the love at the center of our theology, the foundation that gives that love strength and power. Whether you understand the life force within you in purely humanistic terms or with more mystical language, whether you talk about human nature or energy or spirit or God, may your foundation support you in an ever-growing sacred self. May it strengthen you, nourish and equip you to live your love in ever-widening circles. May it be so, and amen.